Ilana Freeland, a local author and researcher who's written an extraordinary book, Chemtrails, HAARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth. Quite a title, quite a subject. I've attended a number of her presentations about her book and her research, and I think you're going to find she's an extraordinary mind and a very courageous individual to bring this information to you, because it needs to be heard, because it is real and it's affecting all of us continuously. Ilana, perhaps we should start. I was always intrigued a little about how you got into this research. What was your initial intention, and how did it affect you in terms of perception and everything we've been talking about as you came into this extraordinary amount of information and your intention and motivation to research and make a book about it?
Well, it began when I was researching some other books I've written. I've been a ghostwriter for many years. I've worked for an agency in New Mexico. I've written other people's books. And I had gotten a master's degree in historiography at St. John's College in Santa Fe. So I really felt confident to be able to do ghostwriting. And that was great training for doing research and writing expository. So I was at the same time, when I was doing ghostwriting, I was working on my own books. It's called the Sub Rosa America series. And they are fictional histories or historic fiction about America since Kennedy's assassination. I've been obsessed with this for 20 years. Actually it's 22 years now. And before that, when I was a teenager, I don't know if I ever told you this, Steve, but I had tea with Kennedy in the Rose Garden when I was 15 years old.
Wow. I
had been at Girls State and had its mock government on a state level. And then the girls at my state, 700 or 800 girls, had elected me to go to Washington to represent them at Girls Nation. So I was in the Rose Garden with him in August 1963, and I hear that Bill Clinton was there as well. He has lots of photo ops of himself there. I had really just one. And so meeting Kennedy was a huge experience, but 4 months later, he was dead. And I had to go back to these civic groups that had paid for my trip to Washington and give a speech about my day with Kennedy in a rooms full of sobbing people, basically. So I always count that as the beginning of my political consciousness and my public speaking. So then the 60s happened, as you know, and I was always involved in my college paper. I went to several universities and colleges, keeping my grade point high, traveling around, seeing what the 60s was about. It was a huge event. We all knew it. And I was involved in Berkeley street riots and would write it up for my college paper. I was at UC Santa Barbara when someone, it wasn't students, burned the Bank of America to the ground. And the political aspect is hardly ever emphasized for my generation. But that was really the big one, not just sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You need to put politics in there. So for years I went on. I became a Waldorf teacher and a storyteller, and always reading histories, because I know that if you understand the past, you might have a small chance of not repeating it. So I've always kept up on my history, and I consider mythology to be part of that, because myths are actually, they're very disguised histories. So eventually, I was doing the Sub Rosa America series. I had to research for 10 years to understand what Peter Dale Scott, professor at UC Berkeley, calls the deep politics of America. So I'm a big fan of his. He's a brilliant man, a very insightful man. So the deep politics led me to have two files among maybe 50 or so, one labeled chemtrails, one labeled HARP. And of course, HARP was the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project up in Gakona, Alaska. And at that time, that would put us at about 4 years ago, perhaps 5 years ago. At that time, I thought the two were completely separate because I had two files. But then I'd done some work for Adam Parfrey at Farrell House Publishing Company. And when I was living in England, I'd done some editing for him. And when I got back and moved up here from Santa Fe, Adam asked me if I thought I could write a book on chemtrails. And I said yes. Even though my file was not fat at that point, it was substantial. So I began to research it. And at the same time that I lived in Santa Fe, I had become very close friends with independent scientist Clifford Carnicom and his wife Carol. And we would go out to breakfast, and like once every couple of weeks, and Clifford and I would end up talking about chemtrails and the Morgellons that he was researching, the fibers dropping from chemtrails. He was writing papers at that point. That would have placed it at about 2005, 2007, something like that. And we would talk about that while the other people at the table would talk about other things. So destiny put him in my path is how I see it. He's a most honest, painstaking scientist. My father was a scientist. Unlike my father, however, Clifford was not Navy intelligence, which my father was. And my father was an inorganic chemist. I always hated chemistry because it was my father's field. But I had a biology background. So much of what Clifford said made sense to me. He looked at my blood under a microscope. He looked at my saliva. I did have the Morgellons fiber in my body. And Clifford explained to me that because they were being delivered in chemtrails, these aerosol, these chemical trails in the sky, you could call them persistent contrails. At that time, I was not as clear as I am now on the difference between a contrail and a chemtrail. But I understood that this was a delivery system. And this certainly wasn't the first time our government had used its own population for experimentation. I was born 1947, 2 years after the Manhattan Project ended in terrible bombs, one in New Mexico, two in Japan. And so I was a child of the bomb. And I do believe this to this day that my father was one of the team working on the bombs, not in Los Alamos, but out in the Micronesian islands. So Clifford he also has a physics background, and he had worked for the Department of Defense and the Bureau of Land Management, but had quit them, like many ethical scientists are doing, and I highly recommend any listening to this think about it, that to work on things of his own choice and not to give his intelligence to something he absolutely felt was dangerous to all of the planet and humanity. So Clifford has done a tremendous amount of work. We're friends to this day. I told him that, hey, do you think I can write a book on chemtrails? He said, well, you're a good writer and you know how to research and I'm here. So yeah, of course I do. So that really gave me the go-ahead. And it took a year to a year and a half for me to write it. It came out in 2014. I've been criticized for way too many footnotes, and I totally agree there are way too many footnotes, but I was so sick and tired of hearing about the conspiracy theory that I wanted to just pummel it to death. And I think I succeeded. I'm now writing the sequel to it, which is about the space fence, which since they have been able to ionize the atmosphere, and I'll explain that as we go on, they now can resurrect the space fence from when it was part of the SDI program, the Strategic Defense Initiative under Ronald Reagan. George H.W. Bush was vice president then, and Richard Cheney was the Secretary of Defense. And I call them the Reagan Troika. It was under them that the SDI was put forward. Of course, the Star Wars movie had just come out, and so it was very nice. They could segue it into people going, ha, 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 isn't this wonderful, and calling it a Star Wars program. But really, it was intended not just as a ballistic missile defense system, but it had much larger ideas in mind. And now that the atmosphere is ionized and is being re-ionized every day, they are now able to, the space fence is up and running right now.
Wow, now that was a tremendous amount of information. So let's go back let's go back to the statement you made about President Kennedy's assassination, because this was an important event in your life at an important time in your life, and may have been pivotal in sending you in the direction you've just spoken about. How long did it take for you to come to real knowledge and information that something was very sinisterly wrong with the assassination, and that it had to have much deeper levels, and in the intentions of which had to be a very large structure and a very large organization to pull off? How long did it take for you to come to real information about that regarding the Kennedy assassination?
The Kennedy assassination was something I literally could not see anything on television or even look at. The terrible, you remember how they used the media to show Jackie crawling over the trunk over and over and over and over. And I knew that was a psychological technique. Sure. It doesn't take a lot to figure that out. But I would start weeping. And the same thing with, because as you remember, Martin Luther King was next, and then Robert Kennedy. The three heroes of my generation were knocked off in just a few years. And I knew it was the same people. I could feel it, but I guess the first thing I did when I realized I was writing a book, and at that time I thought Sub Rosa America would be one book. I had no idea it would be a series of 5, which it is now. I started with the Kennedy assassination to sort of see how to do research. So I spent a long time on it, and this would be when we had finally gotten the internet in the early 90s. That was when I was doing all that work. And here in Olympia, God bless the research librarians, because they were virtually working only for me. And they became very interested in what I was ordering, because there was nothing here. We would always have to do interlibrary loans to find the materials that I needed. So I was reading right-wing constitutionalist Republican documents. I was reading left-wing, everything having to do with the Kennedy, King, and Kennedy assassinations. So it didn't take long to realize what had happened in Dallas. You had big oil, you had the Bay of Pigs, and the wake of that, in which Kennedy fired Allen Dulles, head of the new CIA. Allen Dulles and his brother John Foster Dulles, who was then Secretary of State, they were complicit in something that I would subsequently spend a long time on, which was Operation Paperclip. And Operation Paperclip was a huge piece of the puzzle, to realize that we had fascists, deeply committed fascists in the United States.
Nazis.
Throughout the war. And that, you know, then you find out Prescott Bush is supporting the Nazi regime, and you find out TNT. And so, I mean, I couldn't write fast enough. And the files grew bigger and bigger and bigger. So that was what I cut my teeth on, really, were those 3 assassinations. And from there, I went to Paperclip. And then I ended up, and I would like to remind you of something very crucial, I think, which is what is called the octopus. Danny Casolaro was killed. Danny was a journalist. I had talked to him twice on the phone, so I felt like I knew him. And it crushed me when he was murdered so savagely, because he had discovered the Promise software had been stolen by our Department of Treasury, basically, from the William Hamilton, who actually at one time worked for the CIA, NSA, whatever you want to call it. And this software was a backdoor to every system that you needed. And so that really is huge when you want to understand. I think by then Clinton and Hillary were in office, to understand how the financial took off, because with that back door, blackmail was possible, amazing thefts were possible, murder and mayhem followed. The stakes got very high in the early 90s through the Promise software. It's also called the Inslaw affair. That's the name given to it by the press. So that too, I read the right wing on it, I read the left wing on it, so that I could understand what the truth might be in the middle. That's sort of my technique. I have a technique of 5 sources across the board from left to right, and then I make the decision as to how much is valid. So I had all that background. See, I had all that research background, for the Kennedy assassination, I very much feel, between it and the bomb in White Sands, New Mexico, these are the 2 events that sent us spiraling. And along with those, you'd have to have Operation Paperclip, when basically the Third Reich was moved here.
It's important, I wanted to mention that, I'm glad you did that, because there may be people who don't know about Project Paperclip. So Project Paperclip was the program at the end of World War II that brought Nazi scientists, Nazi SS officers, other important research scientists, the entire foundation of their rocket program, the missile and rocket program, that was brought to America. We were paranoid that the Russians would grab them, so we brought them to America. They became the foundation at that point for the CIA. They became the foundation of NASA and our space program. The rest of them were skirted away down to South America and completely took over most of South America, along with the Rockefeller Empire. And many of them who pretended to be dead continue to live for many, many years, and were still alive in South America as they dominated economics and politics and all the agendas going on in South America. So I wanted to make sure people knew that.
Right.
So
one more thing I would add to that, though, which I think is crucial, is the MK Ultra program, the mind control program.
In what year?
That would have been 53, which it was claimed that it ended in 71 or 72, but it really didn't. That too was from Operation Paperclip, because we not only put the scientists on our bases and in all the places you mentioned, we also put them in our mental health institutions, we put them in our hospitals, our universities, we scrubbed their records, and we gave them carte blanche. They had new homes, they had new names, their families became part of our culture. And for a long time, I thought it must be through ignorance that Dulles, the Dulles brothers and others brought them in. I don't think that anymore. I think that they realized that they had a really great system. There was a way to get all the resources in the United States. There was a way to handle the massive amount of terrain that we have and the population. So I do think it was very purposeful. And when I start talking deeply about the chemtrails HARP issue, I very much feel that paperclip scientists are behind, if not just this science, which is a plasma science, they are definitely behind the lowering of the ethics of our scientists and our politicians. I mean, it is lower than low now.
It was a complete takeover of every area of
was.
American geopolitical life. That's why the Kennedy assassination is so profound. It leads to every one
It
of
does.
these.
It does.
It never ceases to amaze me.
It is amazing.
So when did you then first find out or begin to experience the symptoms that you then later would call Morgellons? And we should explain to people who might not know about Morgellons.
Yeah.
And then you were tested, that you said you found the fibers.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I had no symptoms.
You had no symptoms?
No symptoms. No, I have no lesions that are erupting in sort of volcanic fashion with little red, black, and blue wires sticking out of them. No, I have none of that. That's what I'm saying. Clifford made it clear to me that we've all breathed these in. They're in all of us.
So how long in your research, how long have you found that spraying programs have been in effect that would have put those microfibers and other ingredients, which we'll talk about, into our atmosphere? How long has that been operational based on your research?
This particular program, and it's out of a program that has existed for years, but we have been sprayed many times. I mean, it's come up recently that they're finding that St. Louis was sprayed. I talk about that in the book. The counties in California have been sprayed with moth deterrent. I mean, there are so many incidents of populations being experimented on that I find it that people don't want to accept that our government would spray us to be almost laughable, because it has gone on, not just Vietnam. That was in a foreign land. We all know that we commit terrible crimes in other countries, but for some reason Americans find it hard to believe that we would commit those same crimes here. But we are committing them.
And isn't it extraordinary to find out they still have this disbelief and this cognitive dissonance about that, when you can find the public laws that were set in place to allow them to legally do this, the executive orders that authorized it, and a host of everything along this line, and the admission that they have been doing it since the late 40s. And yet people still refuse to believe that this is the case, when all they have to do is a little legal research into the laws that allowed them to do this legally. And this, I think, they just can't get a grip emotionally on that aspect.
Cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance, right there.
It's everywhere, and it has been purposely created. It's like what your topic is about, what is good and what is bad, what is perception. Our perceptions, as Marshall McLuhan warned us in the 50s, our perceptions have been mediated. They are not ours anymore. They belong to the media. And the media moves them whatever way they want. So I had the advantage as a child of not growing up with television. So I didn't have a fixation on it. I didn't have that, oh, I'm feeling a little depressed and lost today, I think I'll watch some TV. I didn't have that. I was raised in an immigrant household where I learned to read early so that I could read the letters from the government to my grandmother, who always feared a letter from the government, even though she was a legal immigrant. So I have great compassion for people, that they don't feel they don't have the confidence to do research. They don't even know how to begin to research. And the internet is such a cunning device. Many people think, oh, it's just all these nonsense theories and you have to wade through one conspiracy thing after another, and you never know if it's true, and how will I know if it's true? Whereas what I found when I was researching this book is all major military documents that I needed are all on the net. They're in open source.
They're right there.
Because the best place to hide something is in the open, and the military knows that. So a lot of what I have in the book is from military documents, because they have been pursuing chemical and biological warfare, and that's what this is, for generations. I mean, let's go back to World War I. My publisher called me one day and said, Ilana, I just found this book that has chemtrails in World War I. Like from 1917 on to 1922. So he sent me the book, and I looked through it, and I thought, yeah, of course they were experimenting with chemicals in the air. I mean, that's what the whole World War I was. It was air chemical warfare.
Mustard gas,
and it was
on and
it
on.
was a horror,
Yeah.
and it completely wiped out an entire generation of European youth.
And then, interestingly, the Spanish influenza epidemic took off immediately upon the return of soldiers exposed to who knows what, and took out the greatest amount of population since the Black Plagues. And that came right on the heels of World War I.
And I think that's important to understand, that this technology is now with us. The new thing is that it's on a global scale. And that's what I try to show in the book, is the big picture. Because you're not just talking the military chemical warfare experimentation on its own citizens and citizens of other NATO countries, I might add. You're also talking a terrific way to make money, because this is all about weather derivatives. When Enron hit in 1990, Enron was the first corporation to establish a weather derivatives desk. And probably not much was going on other than, certainly you can seed hurricanes on a local level. That's not a problem. You can seed tornadoes. You know, they had the silver nitrate. I don't know what else they had, but it already began in 1990. So then when Enron collapsed, it moved to another desk, and now it's at the Chicago Mercantile. And so any fat cat can reach deep into his pockets and bet on weather warfare incidents, weather destruction, and they'll make money either way. Say, I mean, the insiders are making money hand over fist because they get a call from maybe the Rothschilds, who owns one weather, what's it called? It tells you what the weather is, or Raytheon is running another one, and they'll get a covert, subtle call, and then they'll place their bet, and then they'll make a lot of money. But even if they don't even if the weather doesn't pan out the way they thought it would, they'll still make money. They're safe. It's a secure bet, and it's very much an insider club. And so you have what Eisenhower was talking about. You have the military-industrial complex that now has a technology they can use to muscle the world into behaving the way they want. Any nation must behave, or they will find themselves with a terrible drought or a terrible flood.
And they call it disaster capitalism, and then make money and then come in and rebuild the country they just destroyed by weaponizing the weather.
They don't call it disaster capitalism. That's
Naomi
Naomi Klein's term from Shock Doctrine, her book. Yeah. I like that book. The climate book she wrote recently is not that exciting because she doesn't obviously know about this. She really should, because it serves the shock doctrine so well. So it's about money. It's about experimenting with biologicals. It's about seeing what happens. It's about piggybacking microprocessors and various nanotechs, including sensors. You know, we're breathing sensors everywhere now. They're all on a nanoscale. All of this has been done very quietly to see just how human beings now do with it as they adjust and get things in where they want them. And I do feel that they are experimenting still. There are so a lot of people feel that they want to kill us. I don't think that's, I think they know they could at any point. I don't think that's even a question to them. They could kill large numbers of people in a swath. And I'll explain that. That has to do with frequency and pulsing. But I think they find to have an open lab where they can experiment with things and then have their hackers hack into hospital records, clinic records, whatever. I think what they don't want is for, well, this is breaking international law, this is breaking domestic law. I mean, you name it, this is breaking it. So, of course, it has to remain peripheral to the public's mind. And so there's been tremendous effort to, they have the new term geoengineering. This is actually, geo, it means earth. This is not just earth engineering. This is people engineering. This is transhumanism. We're heading toward it. It'll be the singularity. And Big Pharma is very invested in biotech. So is the medical industry. So is NASA. So is the military. So you get this picture that all of this, even though an article come out here or there, all of this is in the future tense. It's always about what they're going to do, and we're trying to do this, and we're experimenting with this. Well, it's going on right now, and one of the greatest methods is coming from the sky. And I have to add GMO foods, of course, because Monsanto and DuPont and all the other chemical players, Dow, they're all involved in this technology that I've written a book about. And they're investing in it, big money, because they know it's coming. And they've used the media, the news sources, as a way to confuse the issue, as a way to distract people. I mean, if you can't distract someone by setting up a false flag event like the San Bernardino shooter, you know, to distract people from the fact that there's this big conference going on in Paris around climate, the COP21, then you can distract them with entertainment, their personal lives. There are all sorts of ways to distract and disseminate disinformation about the issue. You can set up, yes, the planet is warming. No, the planet is about to enter a little ice age. You know, so, you know, this has gone on consistently since before we brought the book out. And I understand all of it now, of course, because I've gotten deep into this issue and deep into the chemistry of it and the plasma physics of it. This is not what I thought I would be doing, but the clarion call of danger, danger, this is tremendously danger. I mean, I'm reading a chemical essay right now by a young man, German man named Harold Kautz-Vella, in which he explains very carefully that the barium that we're now inhaling, along with strontium and aluminum in nanoparticulates, that this can change our genetic structure, our cell structure. This is in our bodies and in our children's bodies, and even in the placenta of babies that are born out of the womb. I mean, this is, there has never, to my knowledge, been anything this huge. And I think that some leaders, national leaders, are slowly waking up. Some scientists are throwing in the towel and don't want to play the game anymore, even if their career goes down the tubes. But it always takes courage, because some of them are being killed. It depends on how deep you are in, how many confidentiality agreements you've signed. But it is a clarion call to citizens like myself. No, I don't have a PhD in plasma physics. Actually, now that I see how conditioned most PhDs are, and how the peer review system in science is failing it utterly, I'm very glad that I don't have a PhD in physics, because I can then have a fresh approach. And this, besides which, this physics is brand new. Plasma physics has only been around since 1937. I mean, what is plasma? You know, fourth state of matter, yes, but what can you do with it? And so that's the game going on now. And that's what this ionized atmosphere is. It's plasma clouds. These are not real clouds. Mm-hmm. They are, the weather is being primarily engineered off the southern coast of California in the South Pacific. And you see what they've done to California. They're driving all the moisture north to join up with the jet stream over Vancouver Island and dip it down east for all sorts of weather experimentation back east.
Very important, I think, that people understand what you just said, that much of the weather phenomenon we are experiencing, not only on our west coast but worldwide, is engineered, manipulated weaponization of the atmosphere. I constantly see people don't get that. You know, we can talk about chemtrails, and they still don't really get that. We can talk about HAARP, maybe they've heard a little bit of that, but they really need to understand weaponization of our living atmosphere.
Yes.
This is an extraordinary thing, which, by the way, they have no guarantees what the outcome may be. They are messing with planetary disaster as they guinea pig upon us. What an outrageous thing.
Not just planetary disaster. This could entail our entire magnetosphere, our ionosphere, our moon, our sun. I mean, I know it's big. It's so big, and people think, well, you know, how can you possibly know that if you're not an astrophysicist? Well, you know, when you do research, you learn how research works. You're building one tiny step after another, and you're not making any leaps. You don't allow yourself to make any leaps. You're looking at sources, and you're going forward. And that's how I've done it. And I see now what these megalomaniacs have in mind. Of course, they want to be as gods. Yeah. And they are willing to sacrifice their own families and their own well-being for it. I mean, I have to give them credit. They are dedicated, devoted. They get up at dawn and go to sleep at midnight. They do not have hangovers. They are not smoking dope. They are focused, and they are willing to sacrifice for their vision of what they want to achieve here.
Very, very important you said that, because the common people don't get that. And another thing I'm so glad you just stated, because I've run up against this. People go into the cognitive dissonance and the disbelief because they can't imagine an overall command and control structure that could pull all this off.
Yeah.
And they always want to ask, well, who's running the show? Who's doing this? Whoever? And you try to explain, and they can never imagine how this could work, that such extraordinary experiments can be done. But they are being done. And how do you explain, how can we break a crack in the wall of that aspect of people's disbelief and cognitive dissonance? Do you have any ideas?
Well, I'm committed to educating the public. I mean, I just was visiting Michael Murphy, the filmmaker of Why in the World Are They Spraying and What in the World Are They Spraying? And Michael's working on a third film. And his take on it is very different from mine. He wants action. He wants to litigate, he wants to legislate, and that's what he's going for.
What do you think of that?
Well, for me, my job is public educator. I'm a disseminator because I'm smart, and I know how to research, and I know how to write, and I know how to speak. So that's what I do. And there are a lot of us in the movement who are doing that. And some of us are working on a local level, like down in Arizona. There are some activists who are working legislatively and pounding away at that, and I wish them success. Mm-hmm. But for me, to me, it's a two-headed snake. The first head is consciousness, because we've been bludgeoned to death with PhDs who know how to use media to turn us to our alpha wave when the TV goes on, when the movie starts up. And our education system has joined forces with it to dumb us down and make us hate reading, like kids do now, and hate thinking, and thinking is beside the point. And you know, me, I'm a feeler, whatever that means. So that's one of the problems, and the other is, stopping this through some sort of public voice. But unless I do the first and really hammer away at people, and that's why I spend hours a day on my closed Facebook group, which are activists. It's all, I've created, some of 1,500 members are true activists, and they're learning how to do the research. They're learning to know the difference between BS and something genuine. And these people are devoting hours per day. There are people out taking endless photographs and film footage of the clouds in their areas. I'm in touch with people all over the world. I'm probably in touch with people from at least 150 countries.
Fantastic.
They're all pouring into my site and other sites, not just mine. But I'm a taskmaster, and I throw anyone out that either curses or abuses anyone. They're done. They can go find someone else. And this is what I have done, even though I despise Facebook. It was started by the CIA. I know I'm on 50 watch lists, whatever. But I need to awaken people to their condition, because I'm a big believer that we're spiritual beings. We live here on the planet for a while, each lifetime, and we need to know where we live and what is going on while we're alive. We can't just dive into some little rabbit hole of feeling safe and loved and secure that we've lived a life. I think that we're living in tremendously exciting and challenging times. I mean, as I say in the book on page whatever, at the beginning, we're living in a space age, and people don't even know it yet. There are space wars going on up there. That's why I'm writing about the space fence, is to explain what's going on between the upper atmosphere and the lower atmosphere. Now that I see how they've set up all the ground, the ground instruments that they needed, and then they've got the space instruments, and now they've got them all tuned to the same frequency and the same pulse. So they work in concert. And now all they had to do, it's like what Jade Helm was practicing down in the Southwest, is put an AI over it, an artificial intelligence over it. So this is a mechanical world that they have in mind, and they want a hive mind for the people. And the really bad news, I feel, it's the worst news I can think of, is that they can zap populations with certain frequencies. They can pulse it, and everything in us has its own frequency. And the pulse has to do with our brain, has to do with our nervous system, has to do with our decisions in life, our, like this I just read before I came to see you, about this poor fellow in Heathrow Airport who stabbed a knife in his head. Well, we can all say that, well, he was obviously imbalanced. Well, we don't know what that is. How did he get through security, and who gave him the knife? Where did he find it?
It's so important. I want to just pause right there so the listeners can understand. Most of these events that seem so shocking, so violent, so extraordinary, can be engineered and are being engineered. And you heard it from a brilliant, courageous person who is telling you, you don't have to be a PhD to have the common intelligence to stand up and research and find the truth yourself, or the courage to do something about it. Stunning example. I can't applaud you or congratulate you enough for being an example of that as well as stating it so beautifully.
Well, I feel that John Kennedy had, I list, I think, 12 things in my Sub Rosa America books that I finally realized he had on the burner that he was going to bring forward. I mean, we've all heard rumors about things, but there are plenty of books now on those things, one of them being to close down the Federal Reserve.
Elimination of the Federal Reserve and fiat currency, and?
He was going to get rid of the CIA.
Disband the CIA. His term was scatter it to the wind.
You name one.
No, go ahead.
No, I need help.
All right, we're going to really jump off the cliff. He was going to tell the truth about UFOs and alien contact. Really outrageous, and stop the Vietnam War because he understood where it was headed.
And he was going to join forces with Russia, with the Soviet Union, for our space hopes, moonshot, etc. And that was really the last straw. That was really the last straw.
Too much.
So as to what really tipped it over into murder, it's important to understand that the plans to murder him began with his election. So it was not like it was any one incident. They simply did not want this Catholic guy in office anymore. And they didn't like the way that he liked to work with his brother, and he was not a team player.
Do you believe there was a similar thing that happened to John F. Kennedy Jr.?
Oh, he was killed.
And because of, specifically?
He was making noises that he was going to run for office, but also his what was it called, G Magazine? What was the name of that? It actually, there were articles in there that were tending toward looking into, more deeply into his father's murder and his uncle's murder. So anyway, I wanted to bring that up because, in a way, Kennedy had such a huge impact on me and on my generation, I believe. But for me, it's like I have to serve the truth. That's the only reason I'm here. I'm not here to make money. I'm not that good at certain things in life. I'm really good at teaching. I'm really good at writing. I'm good at encouraging people to be all they can be, because it's a gift to be here, and one must work hard when one has a gift, and to use it all up before you leave here for wherever you think you're going. And so for me, there's no real choice. It's sort of a mission. This is a mission, and I was led to this subject. I could have probably done anything except math. I'm not very good at math, but I'm pretty good at science. I'm pretty good at a lot of things, and so I was led to this, and it was huger than I had any idea of. And I saw why Clifford Carnicom, I mean, he has spent years on this, and he is still spending years on it. His Carnicom Institute. You can go to his site and read his papers on all his discoveries having to do with this technology, and the understanding that this probably had something to do with what happened to my father. I think my father was abused by the military in some way where he was never free, and he was he did things that were crazy. Were really crazy. So I think this is for him as well, to kind of clean up my family karma, perhaps. But there are many reasons I do it. But I don't know if you want to hear how exactly the weather is engineered. I could give you.
Do please, please, because the people need to hear this briefly.
Yeah. It's a picture that I've formed. And I've spent a lot of time on it so that I can be as clear as I can be. All right, so let's take, for example, the Navy ships and Air Force. They have their own Air Force down in the South Pacific. So there's moisture coming in off the South Pacific. It's the normal way weather travels from west to east because the jet stream moves from west to east. So the weather is coming in toward the United States, toward Baja, and the ships are out there getting ready for whatever the agenda is, that would be coming in by communications, perhaps from Washington, perhaps from Colorado, perhaps from Florida, Texas, whatever the plan for the day was. And so they take the moisture system and they begin to lay the chemtrails overhead. And the chemtrails are full of heavy metals, which are very conductive. That would be aluminum, primarily aluminum, barium, and strontium. Sometimes lithium is in them now. We have found. So so the chemtrails are laid, and that would be at 28,000 feet at least. They're laid there, and they're laid by military and sometimes by commercial jets too. But in this case, it's usually a Navy operation. So they lay those chemtrails, and those metals begin to filter down. And at the same time that happens, it's happening that the moisture and the metals are because moisture loves particulates. So there's a merging together. And once those are merged, then there is radio frequency is brought in. And that radio frequency can be from an offshore SPX, which is a huge radome. Looks like a big golf ball.
I've seen pictures of it.
Can be on an oil rig. It can be from offshore if it's close enough to shore, like at Edwards Air Force Base. They've got plenty of instruments that could do this, but they zap it, so it activates it right away. It's ionized. Okay, then once it's ionized, they can begin to move it, and they move it. Usually, you'll see if you look at the satellite Doppler maps that you can find on the web, which is great. I don't know how many are really true anymore, but I know some are. And then you can watch them, and they'll shoot a laser along the shore, just offshore. And that laser creates what's called a waveguide, and that's what draws. In a way, they're creating a suction going on. They're sucking moisture off of the land, and they're also sucking moisture this way. And then those get in that waveguide, and they start heading north. And it's always along the shore because no moisture is allowed to California, period. Now, some moisture may fall in Oregon. There may be a little that's allowed up there, or by the time they get to Washington State, we get some moisture. But not always. Sometimes they'll bypass us too.
Do you believe they're doing this to California to cripple the agricultural industry in California?
It's about food, just as Kansas has also. I don't know how many people know. It's been in a drought for 4 years.
That's right.
So the two breadbaskets, all right, but that's one reason. They never have just one reason. There's
Always.
several. So it'll go north and along that waveguide that the laser has made, and then up by the jet stream is sort of up there hovering over, and it looks like a big sort of pale snake. It's really interesting. It'll get tacked onto that. It'll get sucked up into the jet stream, and then it'll dip down over Idaho, Wyoming, and then it'll come down toward the southwest states. And sometimes, I don't know if you remember, a year or two ago, Arizona was flooded.
Yes.
They had big floods. So
In
unbelievable.
the middle of the summer after being in drought for a very long period of time.
Unbelievable, yes. Yeah. So they could do an operation there. And what they would use, once they're on land, you don't have the ships anymore. You don't have the SBXs. What you have the GWEN towers, the Ground Wave Emergency Network towers. You have the cell towers. You have the NEXRADs, which are also big golf ball things that are usually in tandem with local radio stations, so we have lots of them. So you'll use these. These are all phased at the same frequency as those that originally brought the weather. It's all phased together. And what I'm saying is it's all centralized. Everything is centralized regarding the weather. And so then they can whip up a tornado using low and high pressure zones and tweaking them with frequency. They can produce big tornadoes. They can take it down to the to the Gulf and whip up a hurricane. It can go all the way to the Atlantic, and then they can bring an Atlantic system in as well. And create quite large weather systems that then they can take to Europe, Eurasia, you name it. That's how it's done.
Very important. I want to reiterate something she just said for the listeners here. The cell phone tower system is intricately implicated into this. So it's no accident they want to put one every few square miles. And it's not for your communication convenience. And there are multiple intentions and uses of the entire cell phone tower and Wi-Fi system. And it represents a danger to the entire biological life system on this planet. It's not for your convenience and communication. That's secondary. So important you said that.
Yeah, and it's not just profit. People think that it's
profit's
all
always
about
one little part.
AT&T and et cetera.
Always one little part.
Right, they're all military contractors. All the telecoms are military contractors.
I've discovered that after years of working on the research and effort to stop putting up cell phone towers. And it's very important you understand your government is not trying to protect you, because the Telecommunications Act that was set in place many, many years ago.
1996.
1996 Federal Telecommunications Act indemnified and protected them so that you cannot bring any health evidence into a court of law to stop putting up any of these devices.
Right, and they have absolute right of where to place the cell towers, because they have to be placed geographically exactly for this system. And this system I'm describing is all part of the space fence.
All part of the space fence. Fantastic. So, if we could sum it up, obviously we could talk 10 more shows, and I hope we get a chance to, because this is the direction I want to take my Agenda 21 documentaries into, is speaking with other researchers and authors, people who really understand individual segments and areas of this. And I'm so glad we had a chance to do it. But what I want now is for you to sum it up, the most important thing you want to tell the people about your research and this book, and what they can do after they educate themselves about it more. Hopefully by getting your book and starting with reading your book, but then what would be the most important thing you want to communicate to them that they can do? Because people tend to feel helpless. They tend to feel there's nothing they can do. They feel small. They feel uneducated. What do you want to say to them that reaches out profoundly, like you've been saying, and can make a difference in their action principle?
Well, this is a big part of what you call Agenda 21. I'm now calling Agenda 2030 because of the conference in New York.
Right.
We have the term sustainable development here in Olympia, Washington, at the city council level.
Good, I'm glad you're going there.
Yeah, and if people, you said something where I don't quite know what to do with, like after they educate themselves. I have yet to see the after, because this is a breaking technology. And there are so many parts of our lives that we don't understand are sapping and draining us because of ionized radiation, such as the microwave oven. It's in our environment. Our cell phones are in our environment. We're letting our children play with these devices. We keep the router on at night while we sleep. We have no idea of how we're draining our immune system.
I have a very good idea, actually. It's very serious.
And it's extremely serious. And when people ask me, what can I do, what can I do? I surprise them because they're thinking I'm going to say, go march in the streets, go wave a sign, go do something at the legislature. No, what I'm saying is take care of your immune system.
Take care of your immune system.
This is a long war, and there are many battles.
Prepare yourself to endure. And don't use these devices, and learn how to protect yourself from non-ionizing radiation in every possible way.
I think it's the most powerful thing I can say, because what weighs on me are the younger generations coming, who are probably the most dumbed down of anyone. I don't care how smart they are
I agree.
intellectually.
It's
They're
tragic.
really, really dumbed down,
It's
and they don't
tragic.
have any tradition to hold them that is in any way that I could call kind. So we are facing a tremendous shift in humanity, and we must keep our immune systems strong.
Wonderful.
So that's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming in and speaking. I think you've heard an extraordinary, courageous, dynamic, and knowledgeable presentation there, and that's why I admire her so much. And I wanted to have her come in as my first guest in the Agenda 21. Thank you so much. And please, everybody, read this book, get this book, come to her presentations as she continues to make them. Thank you so much.
Thanks for
Now
having
we're going
me.
to pause, and then I'm going to finish up with one more thing about IMCAs, with a stunning example that wraps it all up together. Thank you again.
Okay, bye.
Earlier, I presented to you an understanding and a possibility to reprogram yourself with the term I replaced conspiracy theory with IMCAs, intentionally manipulated covert agendas. My favorite example of all, and this will really blow your mind if you can open your mind to it. How many of you have ever heard of Albert Pike? Now, I know some of you have studied American history. Maybe you have degrees in American history. You believe you know a lot about it. Do you know who Albert Pike was? Do you? Albert Pike was one of the most influential characters in American history, easily as influential as any of the founding fathers, but on the dark side. So let's talk a little bit briefly. I'll read to you about the history of Albert Pike, what he did. And Albert Pike, born December 29, 1809, in Boston. He studied at Harvard, later served as a brigadier general in the Confederate Army. After the Civil War, Pike was found guilty of treason and jailed, only to be pardoned by fellow Freemason President Andrew Johnson. Why did the president pardon him? He met with him the next day at the White House, June 20th, 1867. Scottish Rite Freemasonry officials conferred upon Johnson the 4th and 32nd degree Freemasonry degrees, and he later went to Boston to dedicate a Masonic temple. Pike was said to be a genius, able to read and write 16 different languages. In addition, he was widely accused of plagiarism, so it's a little mysterious and hard to investigate. At various stages of his life, he was a poet, a philosopher, a frontiersman, a soldier, a humanitarian, and a philanthropist. He was a 33rd degree Mason. He was one of the founding fathers and head of the ancient accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, being the Grand Commander of North American Freemasonry from 1859, and retained that position until his death in 1891. In 1869, he was the top leader of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, KKK. Did you get that? Founded the KKK. I bet you didn't know that one. The costumes of the KKK come from ancient Freemasonry, and before that, ancient Druidism. Pike was said to be a Satanist who indulged in the occult, and he apparently possessed a bracelet which he used to summon Lucifer. This is very important because this is one of the ways this dark side stuff got into Freemasonry, with whom he had constant communication. He was the Grand Master of a Luciferian group known as the Order of the Palladium, or Sovereign Council of Wisdom, which had been founded in Paris. This is American, but this was founded in Paris in 1737. Palladism was brought to Greece from Egypt by Pythagoras in the 5th century. This is ancient stuff, people. It was the cult of Satan that was introduced to the inner circle of the Masonic lodges. It was aligned with Palladism and the Templars. In 1801, Isaac Long, a Jew, wow, brought a statue of Baphomet to Charleston. Baphomet is another term for Satan. South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina was the headquarters of this, where he helped to establish the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. He apparently chose Charleston because it was geographically located on the 33rd parallel of latitude. Incidentally, so is Baghdad. And so the council is considered to be the mother supreme council of all Masonic lodges of the world. Pike's right-hand man was Phileas Walder from Switzerland, who was he was a Lutheran minister, a Masonic leader, an occultist, and a spiritualist. Pike also worked closely with Giuseppe Mazzini. You ever heard that name? Giuseppe Mazzini was born in 1805 and lived to 1872. He was a 33rd degree Mason and became head of the Illuminati in 1834 and founded the Mafia. The Mafia in 1860, 1 year before the American Civil War, which, by the way, the American Civil War was planned and financed in 1857 in London and New York. It was absolutely an IMCA. Included 33rd degree Mason Otto von Bismarck from Germany. 33rd degree Mason Albert Pike intended to use the Palladian rite to create a satanic umbrella group that would unite all Masonic groups together. Albert Pike died on April 2nd, 1891, and was buried in Oak Hill Cemetery. Albert Pike's monument. Did you know about this? Albert Pike made his mark before the war in Arkansas as a lawyer and a writer, but as a Confederate brigadier general, he was, according to Arkansas Democrat of July 31, 1978, a complete failure and a washout, not a hero. Yet General Albert Pike is the only Confederate general with a statue on federal property in Washington, D.C. What? How do you explain that? He was honored not as a commander or even as a lawyer, but as a Southern regional leader of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. The statue stands on the pedestal near the foot of Capitol Hill between the Department of Labor and the municipal building. Okay. Lyndon LaRouche and his vice presidential running mate, the Reverend James Bevel, launched a mobilization to remove the statue of General Albert Pike from Washington, D.C. The Illuminati and Albert Pike. Adam Weishaupt, who was the modern recreator of the Illuminati, in 1776, July 4, the same date as American independence. What? Albert Weishaupt, 1748 to 1811, formed the Order of Perfectionists on May 1, 1776, and to this day is celebrated as May Day throughout many Western countries, which later became known as the Illuminati, a secret society whose name means the enlightened ones. I don't think they're very enlightened, although the order was found to provide opportunity for the free exchange of ideas. Weishaupt's background as a Jesuit seemed to have influenced the actual character of the society. Ring within ring, within ring, within ring, within ring. An Italian revolutionary leader, Giuseppe Mazzini, 33rd degree Mason, was selected by the Illuminati to head their worldwide operations in 1834. Mazzini also founded the Mafia, as I said, in 1860. The Bavarian government cracked down on the Illuminati and other secret societies for allegedly plotting a massive overthrow of Europe's monarchies. As the secrets of the Illuminati were revealed, they were persecuted and eventually disbanded, only to re-establish themselves in the depths of other organizations, of which Freemasonry was one. During the leadership, Mazzini enticed Albert Pike into the now formerly disbanded but still operating Illuminati. Pike was fascinated by the idea of a one-world government, way back then, people, way back then, and was asked by Mazzini and readily agreed to write a ritual tome that guided the transition from average high-ranking Mason to a top-ranking Illuminati Mason. It's for this reason most Freemasons vehemently deny the evil intentions of their fraternity. Since the vast majority never reached the 30th degree, they would not be aware of the real purpose behind corrupted Freemasonry. When instructing Pike how the tome should be developed, Mazzini wrote the following to Pike in a letter: "Remember that a Freemason wasn't started by Pike, rather it was infiltrated by the Illuminati, who were looking for a respectable forum in which to hide their clandestine doctrines. We must allow all the federations to continue just as they are, with their systems, their central authorities, and their diverse modes of correspondence between high grades of the same right, organized as they are at present. But we must create a super right which will remain unknown, to which we will call those Masons of high degree whom we shall select. With regard to our brothers in Masonry, these men must make pledges to the strictest secrecy. Through this supreme right, we will govern all Freemasonry, which will become the one international center, the more powerful of which, because its direction will be unknown." That's an IMCA, all right? Now, it's very important. I want to come down here and read to you about this famous letter to Mazzini, where Pike predicts essentially all the history to this day. The plans to Mazzini are in a letter which graphically outline plans for a one world order, the New World Order, and we can marvel at how it accurately predicted the events that have already taken place. The First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the czars in Russia, making that country a fortress of atheistic communism. The divergencies caused by the agentur of the Illuminati between the British and Germanic empires will be used to foment this war. At the end of the war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other governments and in order to weaken all religions. This was written in 1871, people. Students of history will recognize that the political alliances of England on one side and Germany other, Otto von Bismarck, co-conspirator with Albert Pike, were instrumental in bringing about the First World War. The Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and political Zionists. That word, political Zionists, as far back as 1871. The war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed, but that political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of the head of Israel in Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must be strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would then be restrained and held in check until the time we would need it for the final social cataclysm. What is the final social cataclysm? After the Second World War, communism was made strong enough to begin taking over weaker governments. In 1945, the Potsdam Conference between Truman, Churchill, and Stalin, a large portion of Europe was simply handed over to Russia, And on the other side of the world, the aftermath of the war with Japan helped to sweep the tide of communism into China. 100 million deaths in China alone. Refugees who argue the terms Nazism, readers who argue the terms Nazism and Zionism were not known in 1871 should remember the Illuminati invented both these terms and these movements. In addition, communism was an ideology and, as a coined phrase, originated in France during the Revolution. In 1785, Restif coined the phrase 4 years before the Revolution broke out. Restif and Babet, in turn, were influenced by Rousseau, as was the most famous conspirator of them all, Adam Weishaupt. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agentur of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the State of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, and spiritual and economic exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we will provoke a formidable social cataclysm which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, the origin of savagery, and the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate the destroyers of civilization, and the multitude disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic systems will from that moment be without compass and direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out into the public view. The manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. Since the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, world events, and in particular the Middle East, show a growing unrest and instability between modern Zionism and the Arabic world. This is completely in line with the call for a third world war to be brought between the two, their allies on both sides. The Third World War is still to come, and recent events show it's not far off. I am not telling you that I support any of this or believe this is righteous. Don't anyone misinterpret me or accuse me of this. What I'm showing you was written in 1871. How did he do that? Was he a Nostradamus? Did he have a crystal ball? No, he knew the plan. He was one of the creators of the plan. That's an Inca. That's what I've been trying to show with this entire presentation all day. Thank you so much. I think I'll rest my case with that. Again, remember my challenge. If you think you know better, let's come forth and debate. And Merry Christmas. God bless. And we'll see you soon with more interesting information. Thank you.